It's about to get interesting, so subscribe and hit like so you don't miss the top content.
I never thought my life would turn into such chaos. It started with little things that I didn't notice, as usual. My wife and I lived in a small town somewhere in the American Midwest. Quiet streets, cozy houses, neighbors who knew each other by name. Everything seemed perfect. But as it turned out, only for me. I always thought I was a good husband, working, providing, trying to be reliable. But I guess it wasn't enough. My wife, Sarah, started to drift apart. First, it was just stares to nowhere. Then it was long conversations on the phone that she ended as soon as I walked into the room. I didn't want to believe anything was going wrong. Maybe I just didn't want to see the truth. One evening when I came home from work, I found the house empty. There was a note on the table. "I need time. You're too boring. I'm leaving." That was it. No explanation, no attempt to discuss. Just the end. I stood in the middle of the living room, clutching that note in my hand, and felt something inside me break. I spent the first few days in a kind of stupor. Work, home, sleep. It all became automatic. I couldn't understand how everything fell apart so quickly. But then came the anger. I started thinking about how she could have done that. We'd been together for 10 years. 10 years that I thought were filled with love and care. But I guess I was wrong. I decided I couldn't just let it go. I didn't want revenge, but I wanted her to realize what she'd lost. So I started with myself. I joined a gym, changed my closet, started reading books I'd been putting off for years. I wanted to become a different person, someone she'd never seen, someone she may never have known. After a couple weeks, I began to notice how people around me began to react differently. Colleagues at work started smiling more often. Neighbors started talking to me on the street. Even strangers in cafes seemed friendlier. I didn't know if it was my imagination or reality, but it gave me confidence. One evening, sitting in a bar, I overheard a conversation at a neighboring table. Two men were discussing Sarah. One of them mentioned that she was now dating some guy from a neighboring town. I felt something boil up inside me. That was the moment when I realized I couldn't just leave it at that. I started following her. Not literally, of course, but I started learning about her life through mutual acquaintances. I wanted to know what she was doing, who she was spending time with, and the more I learned, the more I realized she hadn't found what she was looking for. Her new man turned out to be just like I once was, boring, predictable, ordinary. And that's when I decided it was time to teach her a lesson. Not out of revenge, but to make her realize what she'd lost. I started showing up at all the places she'd been. New clothes, new confidence. I didn't approach her. I didn't talk to her. I was just there so she could see that I had changed. At first, she didn't pay attention to me. But then I noticed how her gaze began to linger on me a little longer. How she started looking back when she thought I wasn't looking. I knew this was the beginning. She was beginning to have doubts. And that was exactly what I wanted. I no longer wanted to just be a shadow that reminded her of the past. I wanted her to feel what she was missing, and I knew how to do that. I started going more often to the places where she spent time with her new man. It was a small restaurant on the outskirts of town where I learned they came every Friday night. I didn't hide. On the contrary, I went there with my friends, laughing, joking, ordering the best dishes on the menu. I wanted her to see me enjoying life without her. At first, she pretended not to notice me, but I could see her glance sliding in my direction. The way she nervously fixed her hair or suddenly stopped talking when I passed her table. Her new man, of course, didn't notice anything. He was too busy with himself, his stories, and his certainty that he was the best choice for her. But I knew he wasn't, and I wanted her to realize it. One night, as they sat at their usual table, I walked over to the bar and ordered 2 glasses of wine. I didn't look in their direction, but I could feel her eyes following me. I took the glasses and headed over to the table where a woman I met a couple weeks ago was sitting. Her name was Emily. She was smart, beautiful, and most importantly, completely different from Sarah. We talked and laughed, and I saw Sarah glancing in our direction more and more often. Her new man, of course, didn't notice. He was too busy with himself. But I could see her face growing more and more tense as she began to nervously rub the napkin on the table. I didn't know what she was feeling at that moment, jealousy, regret, or just curiosity. But I did know that she was beginning to have doubts, and that was exactly what I wanted. A few days later, I received a text from her, a short, uncluttered, "Can we talk?" I didn't answer right away. I wanted her to feel what it was like to wait, not knowing what would happen next. When we finally met, she looked confused. She started talking about how things had worked out, how she had made a mistake, how sorry she was. But I didn't let her finish. I said I didn't want to go back to the past. I said that I had changed, that I had found myself anew and that she was no longer a part of my life. She looked at me and I saw her eyes fill with tears. But in that moment, I felt no anger or pity. I felt only relief. I realized that I no longer wanted to be the person I used to be. I realized that her leaving was not the end for me, but the beginning. Looking back now, I realized that this lesson wasn't just for her. It was for me, too. I learned to value myself, my desires, and my dreams. And perhaps that was the most important lesson of all that happened. Some time passed, perhaps something like weeks. I could finally feel life starting to get better. After that conversation with Sarah, I realized I didn't want to live in the past anymore. I decided to focus on myself, my goals, and what makes me happy. But as is often the case, life had a few more surprises in store for me. Emily, the same woman I met at the restaurant, became a part of my life. We started dating, and it was something completely new to me. She was different, bright, independent, with a sense of humor that made me laugh even on the most difficult days. I felt alive with her, and that was what was sorely lacking in my relationship with Sarah. But of course, it couldn't have been that simple. Sarah apparently couldn't accept that I had moved on. She started texting me, calling me, sometimes even showing up at places I'd been. At first I ignored her attempts, but then I realized it wasn't helping. I had to put a stop to it. One evening, as I was walking home from a meeting with friends, I saw her. She was standing outside my house, wrapped up in a light coat, even though it was already quite chilly outside. I walked up to her, not knowing what to say. She looked confused, as if she didn't know why she'd come. "I just wanted to see you," she said quietly. "I can't stop thinking about how things have changed." I looked at her and realized that I no longer felt the anger or resentment I had before. Instead, I felt something like pity, not for her, but for what we had lost. But I knew there was no getting it back. "Sarah," I said softly, "we both know this is the end. You've made your choices, and I've made mine. We can't keep living in the past." She nodded, but I saw her eyes fill with tears. She turned and walked away without another word. I stood there staring after her, feeling something inside me finally let go. I never saw her again after that. She stopped writing, calling, appearing in my life. I heard that she had left town, but I didn't bother to find out more. It didn't matter to me anymore. Things were going well with Emily. We took our time, savoring every moment we spent together. She taught me to appreciate the little things: morning coffee, walks under the stars, laughing until I cried at stupid jokes. With her, I felt that life could be easy and joyful, even after all the trials. But one evening, as we sat on my front porch watching the sunset, she suddenly asked, "Do you ever think about what came before me, about Sarah?" I thought for a moment, then shook my head. "No," I answered honestly. "It's part of my life, but it doesn't matter anymore. You are my present, and hopefully, my future." She smiled, and in her eyes I saw what I'd been searching for so long: calmness and confidence. Looking back now, I realized that everything that happened was necessary. It was a painful but important lesson. I learned to value myself, my feelings, and my time. And perhaps that was the greatest gift I could have received. Life goes on, and I'm ready to move forward, leaving the past where it belongs, behind me. I finally felt everything falling into place. The past was no longer weighing me down, and the future seemed bright and full of possibilities. But as is often the case, life decided to test me once again. One morning when I was going to work, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. I picked up the phone and heard a voice I hadn't heard in months. It was Sarah. She sounded worried, almost scared. "I need to see you," she said. "It's important." I wanted to refuse, to say I didn't have time, but something in her voice stopped me. We agreed to meet at the very restaurant where it had all started. When I arrived, she was already sitting at a table by the window. She looked tired, but there was a determination in her eyes that I hadn't seen before. "I'm pregnant," she said as soon as I sat down. "It's not his. It's from you." I felt the ground go from under my feet. We hadn't been together for over 6 months and this news seemed impossible, but she explained that it happened the night she came to my house. We were both emotionally vulnerable, and it had happened. I sat there trying to make sense of her words. My life, which had just started to get better, was once again on the brink of chaos. I didn't know what to feel. Anger, fear, confusion. But most of all, I felt responsible. "What do you want to do?" I asked, finally finding the strength to speak. "I want to keep the baby," she said firmly, "but I don't want to do it alone." We talked for a long time, going over all the options. I knew I couldn't just walk away, leaving her alone with this. But I also knew that my feelings for her had changed. I loved Emily, and she had become an important part of my life. When I got home, I told Emily everything. She listened in silence, and then she hugged me. "This is your life," she said, "and your choice. But know that I'm here, whatever you decide." I was grateful to her for that. Her encouragement gave me the strength to make a decision. I decided to be a part of the child's life, but not to go back to Sarah. We agreed that we would raise the baby together, but as friends, not as a couple. Now, months later, I look at my life and realize that everything that happened was necessary. I am stronger, wiser, and maybe even happier. I have Emily to support me and a baby on the way. Although the journey has been difficult, I know that everything happens for a reason. Life goes on, and I'm ready to move forward knowing that each step, no matter how difficult, is leading me to something greater. And perhaps that is the most important lesson of all that has happened. A little over a year later, life began to take shape, and everything that had seemed chaotic and uncertain gradually fell into place. But as always, the path to this was not an easy one. When Sarah had the baby, I was there for her. It was a boy. We named him Ethan. The moment I held him in my arms for the first time, I felt something that cannot be described in words. It was a mixture of love, responsibility, and a strange feeling like everything in my life had finally made sense. Even though there were no longer romantic feelings between Sarah and I, we both realized that we were now forever connected through this little man. Sarah and I agreed that we would raise Ethan together, but we would each live our own lives. She rented an apartment nearby, and we tried to do everything we could to make sure our son grew up in love and care. It wasn't easy. Sometimes there were arguments, sometimes we didn't understand each other, but we both did our best for Ethan. Emily, to my surprise, turned out to be incredibly understanding. Not only did she accept my decision to be a part of Ethan's life, but she became an important person to him herself. She came to my house often, played with him, read books to him. I could see the bond forming between them, and it filled me with gratitude. I realized that I was lucky to have met someone who could accept my past and support me in the present. Sarah, meanwhile, had also started to rebuild her life. She found a job she was passionate about and even started dating someone. I was happy for her. We both deserved happiness, even if it looked different for us. Ethan was growing up, and every day I realized more and more that he had become the center of my life. His first steps, his first words, his laughter, all of it filled my days with a joy I had never imagined before. I realized that sometimes the most unexpected twists of fate lead us to what really matters. Emily and I continued to be together. We took our time making serious decisions, enjoying what we had. But one evening, as we sat on my front porch watching Ethan play in the garden, she suddenly said, "You know, I think I'm ready to be a part of this family for real." I looked at her and realized I felt the same way. We started planning our future, not just as a couple, but as a family. And even though the road to that was long and difficult, I knew that everything that had happened had led me to this place. Looking back now, I realize that life is not a straight road. It's zigzags, twists and turns, downs and ups. But each of those moments makes us who we are. And I'm grateful for each of them, even the ones that seemed unbearable in the moment. Ethan, Emily, Sarah, they all became part of my story. And though it began with pain and loss, it continues with love, hope, and the belief that the best is always ahead.